a school psychologist with the Millcreek School District, and as always, I'm joined by school psychologist Marianne DeSaro, Karen Staub, and Kim Quirk. And today we're going to do a little different slant than our past presentations, and today we're going to talk about what it is that a school psychologist actually does in the school district. And starting off with Kim, what are the services that, as a school psychologist, that you provide, Kim?
It can be very different in different school districts, excuse me, but I mean, in general, what a school psychologist can do is we provide information on education, behavior, how kids acquire skills. We do assessments and testing. We're involved in consultation models with parents and with teachers. We can provide counseling, whether it's individual or group. We're all involved in our crisis response teams at our different buildings. We provide in-service training if there's a specific area that teachers or parents want to know about, and we can also be involved in research if we wanted to be.
Okay, you had mentioned assessments. Well, tell me a little more about the assessments that you as a psychologist actually complete with students.
And I know Marianne's probably going to talk a little bit more about this later, but we definitely do academic skills to determine if there could be a learning disability or some underlying significant skill deficits. We can do learning aptitudes. We can do gifted for kids who are doing very well. We can do emotional and personality and social skills for kids maybe who are struggling in the emotional area, and we can look at learning environments and the school climate, and just overall eligibility for special ed is the bottom line of a lot of the stuff that we do.
Okay, so I imagine you use a lot of different kinds of tools and assessments. Yeah. Can you briefly go over some of those?
Obviously, we do intelligence testing a lot of the time, achievement testing, we do checklists. We do adaptive scales to determine where kids are at functionally. We go in and observe children. We interview kids. We talk with parents. We talk with teachers. And we combine that all together for an overall assessment.
Mm-hmm. Good. Now, earlier you had mentioned that one of the roles of the school psychologist is to be a consultant or the consultative model. Can you go into that in a little more detail for us, please?
Millcreek really has a team approach for just about everything that we do, and one of the big things that we do is our student support teams, which Karen is going to talk about in a little bit. But it's really working with the parent and the teacher to try to help the child, and it's by doing a consultation model, you're trying to help more children. It's the same thing with our crisis response teams. It's a team approach. We try to provide alternatives to teachers, parents, administrators.
Like strategies. Those sorts of things to help the teacher in the classroom.
Exactly. To help kids, whether it's with their learning or with their behavior. We try to help them understand where a child may be at developmentally to determine how it's impacting their learning and their behavior. And basically, it's a model that tries to strengthen the community, the school relationship with everyone.
Right, and I think it's also a flexible kind of model that it allows you to do whatever it is that is needed for the child in order to be successful. So there aren't really limits. We're expected to be able to address different kinds of areas in a child's learning and development.
And I think it's really fluid that people kind of go in and out. Different people may be parts of different teams and stuff, mm-hmm. depending on the needs of the child at that time.
That's right. There's no real set team. Again, if it's a health problem that's impacting a child's learning, we may have a nurse sit on a team.
Right.
Whereas if it's more of a behavioral or problem, we would be more likely to have behavior specialists or those sorts of things.
Or the school counselor to help with emotional
right.
things, those sorts of things.
Okay, so the outcome of the consultation or the outcome of this process then would be what, Kim?
A lot of times we try to prevent problems from happening. We certainly are an intervention model. We may develop a behavior plan. Counseling may be involved either with our school counselors ourselves or our school social workers. We try to solve conflicts and problems. There is peer mediation that's involved, that they may be referred to that. We may be helping families deal with crisis and loss. There's a lot of things that happen outside of school but impact a child's learning. We may be designing programs for kids who are at risk for failure and try to implement some things in the school. And overall, we're just trying to foster tolerance and to accept diversity and those sorts of things within the school.
One of the outcomes I always see is it seems like we're communication facilitators as well between home and school.
Yes.
And it's not unusual for the psychologist to be that link between what is going on at home and what is going on in the school.
Right.
Finally, you talked about research, Kim. what kinds of research are we doing in Millcreek right now, and just in general when you mention research?
One of the things that we're involved in right now, it's a restandardization of an assessment tool. It's called the Key Math. It's a math assessment tool, and it's one of the ways we use many different types of assessments, and these companies do need assistance to help keep them up to date on children. So we are involved in helping a company restandardize that. But we also we do research on different topics to try to provide information, whether it's to the school, the parents, the community on different things, and just try to evaluate the overall effectiveness of maybe certain things that are happening in the school building, and gather information on that and data on that to provide, to see if things are working or not.
I know one of our big responsibilities, like you did mention, is that we're always trying to stay up to date on different kinds of methods, be it learning problems or behavior problems and those sorts of things. So I know myself, as well as all of you, we're pretty well read. We have to keep abreast of all the current information that's out there in the research,
and then try to pass that on to the appropriate people.
Right. Changing gears a little bit now, I'm going to go over to Karen, and let's talk a little bit about our student support teams. Karen, what are the student support teams?
Well, the district has an obligation to do child find activities, and that basically means looking for children or identifying children who have some degree of need for some support, whatever that may be. And the student support team is actually the function by how that occurs in the schools. The student support teams are at every level. They're at the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. They have some unique qualities at each of those levels, but they do exist at every level.
How does a student support team differ from, let's say, an IST or an instructional support team or a SAP team? I mean, we throw all these acronyms at parents sometimes. What's the difference, or are they kind of the same, or can you go into a little?
Actually, an instructional support team is actually typically it's a more specific team that's a function of the overall student support team. If you look at the student support process, a parent calls into the school, or a teacher identifies a youngster, or an administrator learns of something that is a need in the child, and any member, anybody can actually request this process, or request that the child be involved in this process. When the child is referred to the student support team, that is a screening team that exists at the school level. And the youngster this team usually meets routinely, usually once a week, but it meets routinely in each of the schools, and the youngster is reviewed at that team meeting. At least their initial basic concerns and needs are reviewed at that meeting. At that point, there is some type of a disposition that occurs, an initial disposition that says that there's going to be some action taken by a member of the team. It could be something like a counselor monitor. The counselor's going to look for more information.
So there's a case manager.
There's a case management kind of component that is assigned. And one of the functions of that could be an instructional support team. The team could decide that this youngster requires an entire process, which is the instructional support team as a function of that. In that situation, the instructional support advisor that is at the school will then begin to gather pertinent information regarding the youngster with the involvement of other team members, whether it be the psychologist, the counselor, the teacher, whoever's involved, the nurse, whoever's involved with that youngster. And they will also invite the parent in for a meeting that will be with that entire team, where that information, the data collection that has been done, is reviewed, and there's some determination of a plan out of that.
And so strategies come out of it.
It's usually a formal written plan, so that the individuals who are involved all understand what their role is in helping that youngster acquire the academic or social or emotional skills that you're working on.
So then the student support team is more, the referrals come to the student support team, and then that team determines what direction the referral is given. Okay, who can make referrals to the student support team?
Just about anybody can. A lot of times we get a call or a concern from a parent. They call in. A lot of times the teacher is noticing things with the youngster that they're concerned about. Sometimes it's the guidance counselor. Sometimes it's the person on the bus. It could be really anybody who's noticing something going on with that youngster and has a concern about that, or feels that it needs to be addressed. So it really can come from any member of the school team.
Even the students themselves.
Right. Sometimes even in the upper grades, we do have self-referrals, of some of the students as well.
How is this whole process documented? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of data collection, and based on the data collection, you're developing strategies, and then once the strategies are in place, what happens after that?
Well, there's a couple things that happen. First of all, there is a function within these teams that allow for periodic review.
Mm-hmm.
So the nice thing is once the youngster is referred to the team, the youngster doesn't get overlooked or lost in the system.
Mm-hmm. So they're not falling through the cracks.
Exactly. There's no falling through the cracks. So there's a review process by which you continuously return, and there's a report given back to the overall team as to what's happening with that youngster. And many times the dispositions can change over there. You might start out with a monitor by the counselor, but then it might move to another issue, whether it's a medical issue or a learning issue, and it might move to one of the other members of the team, like the psychologist or whoever is appropriate. But throughout that process, there is a documentation form that is used, that's followed, that includes demographic information about the youngster, the issues with the original, why the original referral was made, the concerns at that time, the things that were done, that were typically done just within the classroom or within the school environment, prior to the referral, kind of the strategies that the teacher or the family might have been using to try to solve the problem, and then what the dispo was periodically all the way through. That continues to be documented throughout the year. So you have the reviews documented, you have all of the information contained on that form. It also includes all the members of the team that originally reviewed the process. So that includes the administrator, the teachers, the guidance counselors, whoever is involved in that process. And that is kept as a part of the youngster's record for even at the end of the school year. It's filed and kept as a permanent document in there. The nice thing about that is that you do have an opportunity to go back and review what's been done. If it's the springtime and something was done in the fall, you have an opportunity to go back and look at that and make sure that you're still following it.
Right, and what's also nice too is as this child moves into, from one building into another, there's a brief history of any kind of student support team involvement, and that's nice information for the receiving school and the receiving teams to have. Okay, thank you, Karen. Marianne, Kim talked a little bit earlier about evaluations and assessments. What is the purpose of doing an evaluation on a student?
Well, the purpose of an evaluation is to identify if that child has a disability that's impeding their learning, and that if that child needs specialized instruction in order to help them address their learning needs. If all of these things described by both Kim and Karen have not been effective, and maybe they're effective in the early years, but as time goes on, we're finding out that their learning is definitely affected by these problems. We would go to an evaluation. We would ask parent written permission to do that evaluation, and they would, if they give us permission, we would get their input. We would get the input of all the team members, as we described before, including the standardized testing, the ability testing that Kim described, the behavior ratings that teachers would complete, parents complete, and if a child's old enough, a self-report. Observations are done by all team members. It could be by administrators, by the counselors, by the ISAs, and the psychologists. There's an extensive review of records for the evaluation, and if the family going through this process that Karen described, and maybe they have along the way have sought the assistance of some of our service providers in the community, whether it be a therapist or a psychiatrist or a family physician, that too would become part of that evaluation. So really we take all of that information and we determine whether or not the child has a disability.
Okay.
And that's the purpose of it.
When you talk about disabilities, there are eligibility criteria, obviously, that makes a child be able to get special education services. Can you review those eligibility criteria for us, or the disability categories?
There's several different categories, and I think probably a lot of parents are very familiar with the specific learning disability, and that's when a child has a processing problem.
The largest disability.
Right. Yes. There's a lot, and that would be a child with average intelligence, but has reading difficulties, math difficulties, problems in written language, with listening comprehension, those types of areas. A child too may have a disability in speech and language impairment. That kind of is very common as well.
An example of that would be, let's say they process language a little slower and they need some intervention to correct
Right.
that problem.
And as you can imagine, if they have language impairment, they're going to have problems with learning, especially in the early years.
Especially reading, because we know that language is a good predictor of reading ability.
That's right. And then there's mental retardation. There's a small population that would have that. There's more severe or moderate to mild degrees of mental retardation. There's emotional disturbance. That encompasses all the different mental health disorders that a child may have, whether it be anxiety, it could be a mood disorder, depression, things like that. There's an area known as the other health impairment, where they have a health issue that may be impeding upon their learning, such as a seizure disorder.
Disorder comes to mind, right?
Right. And then there's the vision and hearing impairment of a child is affected in those sensory issues, and orthopedic of the specific physical handicaps that may be impairing them. And the last area is the area that has grown significantly in recent years is the area of autism. And again, with autism, there's different degrees. It has a spectrum that goes across, from severe to very mild forms of autism. And we also even test for an evaluation. You don't always think of it with special education, but it doesn't fall under the special education area, but for a mentally gifted student, we also take care of those evaluations for students.
Okay. So you've completed this evaluation, you've written it up. What happens then? How do you communicate this information to the team and the parents?
Okay. The evaluation is actually written into a report. I think Karen kind of described it a little bit, where we take all of this information from all the different team members, including the parent, and we develop a draft written report. And I boldface that draft word because that's exactly what it is. It is a draft until the team, including the parents, meets to finalize that report and to make sure it's accurate. They may add to it or correct it in different ways. Parents are given the report 10 days ahead of time, as well as all the school team members will have it 10 days ahead of time, and it's purposely done to allow that opportunity to thoughtfully, read over the report and to make any corrections or additions that they need to have done. We will have a team meeting at the end of 10 days, and at that point in time, there's even a process. If a team member or a parent disagrees with the report, there's a process that they can disagree. They just have to show with a written statement that will be attached to the report why they disagree with the content of the report.
Okay, so then what is the final outcome or closure of all this process?
As I said in the beginning, the main reason why we're doing evaluations is to determine what the child needs. And it may be that the child has a disability and is in need of a supportive setting with involvement of the special education staff, and they need specialized instruction. It may also be that the child does not need special education and they're determined to be non-exceptional. Sometimes it's just the regular education setting is appropriate to meet their learning needs, sometimes not. All of this is documented in another form that's called the NORP. We have those acronyms that are so common in education. The NORP stands for the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, and that indicates whether the team believes that the child can be serviced within the regular education setting, or if the child has been determined to have a disability and need for special education, that will be noted on the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement as well.
So then what happens if the parent doesn't agree with that recommendation?
There's a procedure in place, and that does sometimes happen, where if the parent disagrees, they can have what we call like a pre-hearing, and they'll be meeting with individuals from, whether it be the superintendent or a designee from the superintendent, to discuss the whole issue, where what the school team may believe is the appropriate placement for the child, and to consider what the parent is saying. And it really is, as we described before, just like it happens in the schools, we are a collaborative team along with the parents at that point in time.
I know from my experience, and I meet with the three of you on a regular basis, because it's such a collaborative kind of process. psychologists, we very rarely have to go to that,
Right.
that due process step.
We usually agree more than we disagree about most issues. There may be something that the parent may disagree about, maybe one issue out of the whole report, but we usually can work those things out. One thing I wanted to mention, that if a child is determined to be not in need of special education, but they do have a disability of some sort, maybe, you know, a mental health, a mild depression, something like that, or anxiety, or a seizure disorder, but they really don't require specialized instruction, there is something called a Chapter 15 504 plan. And what that is that allows us to provide accommodations that we delivered in the regular education setting that would address the child's needs because of the disability or diagnosis that has been determined.
Okay, good. One thing I can say from personal experience, and I'm also hearing the pagers going off, is that school staff rely a lot on the school psychologists, again, to help consult with problems. And again, I'm hearing pagers going off left and right, so we're going to want to wrap this up a little bit. But before we go, can somebody answer for me, how does one become a school psychologist? I mean, what kind of education background do you need? Is it a lengthy process? How does it differ from a guidance counselor? Those sorts of things. Maybe let's just jump in, anybody.
Typically, an individual who's completed their bachelor's degree, oftentimes in education or psychology or one of those types of areas, will decide that they want to go on for further education. Mm-hmm. And if they choose school psychology, they will. The first phase of the school psychology program is typically getting a master's degree in educational psychology. Mm-hmm. That tends to be a little bit more general. A lot of the background, a lot of the preparatory kinds of classes in terms of learning theory, personality theory, those kinds of things.
How many graduate credits would
that's
that be?
Usually about 30 credits.
30 credits. Okay.
Once the person completes their master's degree in educational psychology, they will usually apply to the institutions, the
school psychology.
Second phase, and that is the phase where you get your certification in school psychology. Your specialist certificate mm-hmm. is what it's called in Pennsylvania. And during that phase, it's usually typically a lot more specific in terms of the coursework in regards to testing courses and assessment. Certainly research-based kinds of things, statistics, those kinds of things are all part of that second phase. And usually there is actually a research component mm-hmm. to that. Right. There's also a lengthy internship equal to a year in that part of
We've all supervised students
right.
from local programs, for a year. Right. So when you go through it, it seems like a lengthy process, and then when you get out of it, and you look back, you go, boy, it wasn't really that long at all. But I know that we get additional training above and beyond what someone with a master's in psychology would get. Okay, well, I want to thank everybody. This was very informative. And if you do have any questions regarding any of the information that was presented, you can contact Marianne DeSaro at Grandview Elementary. You want to help me out here?
Grandview, Asbury, and Walnut Creek.
Okay. And Karen Staub is at MIHS and McDowell, and she's being paged right now, so she's probably going to call one of those schools. Kim, you're at?
Ridgefield, Tracy, Vernondale, and Westlake.
Okay, and I'm at Bell Valley, St. Andrew School, which is where part of J.S. Wilson moved, and Chestnut Hill. And you can get a hold of me there. Okay, well, again, I hope we've answered any questions you might have about school psychology or what your school psychologist does. And until next time, this is Tom Morabito, and I'll see you later.